right. Thanks for your patience as we were waiting to get using the room. Welcome back. I hope you had a good weekend. Thankfully, the weather has been a little bit better and not quite as snowy. But as I mentioned to folks who were here on Friday, if at any point you're not able to come to class due to weather or anything else, again, please don't hurt yourself to come to class. Just send me an email and I will send you the Zoom link for that class meeting so that you can attend remotely. All right, so we have a practice question that relates to discussing listening and the taxonomy of listening last week. There are 3 different things at the top of the taxonomy of listening. Which of the 3 types of listening does not follow under the 3? We have A, critical, B, therapeutic, C, comprehensive, or D, appreciative. Take a minute or 2 on this and we'll talk about this question together. Anybody like some more time on this question? All right. So, which of the following is not at the top of the taxonomy of listening? How many people say A, critical, B, therapeutic, C, comprehensive, or D, appreciative? Yes, so the best answer here is C, comprehensive. So on Friday, we talked about the pyramid known as the taxonomy of listening. It's just like Maslow's hierarchy in that in order to get up here to these styles, we have to meet these baselines, right? So discriminative listening is our ability to identify and pick up on sounds and pay attention with our senses. So if you're in a crowded building and you're talking to somebody one-on-one, you're paying attention to that person and engaged in discriminative listening. Comprehensive listening is your ability to fully understand the message that's being given. So if a friend is talking to you about their week, their ability to tell that story and for you to understand and recall it would be comprehensive. Therapeutic listening is about being a sounding board, being available to listen to people if they're venting or sharing their concerns. Critical listening is our ability to question the assumptions or beliefs in what we're listening to. If you've received any political advertisements in the past couple of weeks, you've probably done some critical listening. And appreciative listening is listening for the sake of enjoyment. So putting on your favorite music might be an example of appreciative listening. All of these are good things to know going into the final exam, and all of these are useful things that you could incorporate into your recording and reflection essay. As a reminder, we're about 2 weeks away from the due date for that assignment. At this point, it's a really good idea for you to lock in your conversation and figure out a date when you're going to have that conversation to record so that you can spend next week taking the recording and transcription and really starting to do the writing and analysis. As a reminder, I'm happy to look over rough drafts, outlines, or help you if you're still trying to figure out which conversation you'd like to have. Just send me the outlines or rough drafts no later than a week from Friday so that I have enough time to turn it in before that assignment is due. So last class, we talked about taxonomy of listening. We talked about the idea of listening responses, how we use things such as silent listening or paraphrasing to respond to a message. We also talked about 4 different types of listeners, people-oriented, content-oriented, and talked about what we needed to do to be good at listening. So if you're not here last Friday, I recommend refreshing on some of that content. I do want to give you a few reminders related to the course. First of all, remember that if you have missed more than 3 class meetings, to complete the makeup assignment on Canvas for days past those 3 in order to make up that credit. So that is available for you to work on. I also, again, upload the recording and slides right after class. You're going to notice that Fridays is actually from my other class section. The reason was I screen shared a Star Trek video, and apparently YouTube said that that was a copyright issue, but because I didn't screen share the video in the other class, it wasn't one. So it's my other section, but it's the exact same content. So if you're fresh on Fridays, that's what's going on. There are a total of 8 Canvas prompts. We have the 6th this week. And remember that you do need to complete 6. So if you've been doing all of them, this could be the last one. Or if you do more than the 6, right, I'll grade your highest 6. So I do recommend continuing to work through that. If you're not able to come to class, but you can participate remotely, again, send me the Zoom link or send me the reminder and I'll email you back with the Zoom link. And then just as a reminder to continue to check Canvas, where I'll post any announcements, updates. If you need to cancel class or make a change to an assignment, I'll let you know through that. How many folks have registered for winter classes? Okay, so a few of you. If you have not, I recommend registering for the winter as soon as possible or getting in touch with your advisor as soon as possible about what to take during the winter. The reason for that, right, is that classes fill up. You might have specific things you need to take and you're not able to take them if you're on a wait list. So I definitely recommend getting that going as soon as possible. If you're interested in more communication courses, we've got a number both face-to-face and online in the winter. I'll be teaching small group communication and public speaking. So definitely get rolling on winter if you haven't already. So for today, we are shifting gears to talk about media and the ways in which media impacts our communication and our lives. As we know, the role of technology, of computers, of laptops, of apps, right, has significantly altered the landscapes and the ways that we communicate with each other, both in terms of content, but also in terms of how we think and how we use communication with one another. So we'll be spending time for today and Wednesday on really getting into that. Just as a reminder, Friday is Veterans Day, so that's a day off. We will not be meeting on Friday, so enjoy the long weekend. We'll be using today and Wednesday to talk about mediated communication in a bit more detail. So to start things off for today, I'm going to be sharing a video from a psychology professor at MIT who's quite well known and also crosses over into communication, called Shelly Turkle. Turkle, about a decade ago, came out with a book called Alone Together, where she was talking about this idea of how technology has changed the way that we communicate. This idea that, yes, we have greater connection and the ability to network a lot more, but the quality of our communication and the way that we use interactions with other people has fundamentally changed. And so I'm going to be showing a clip from Shelly Turkle speaking about her main ideas and theories. And as you're watching, I want you to think about what you're noticing here. Do you find yourself largely agreeing with her perspective? Do you disagree? Do you find yourself somewhere in between? Take some time to think about this, because after I show the video, I'll be asking you to do a prompt on your own and also to discuss this a little bit in a group as well. So again, pay attention to the ways in which Turkle is contextualizing and using the role of technology in our communication.
Just a moment ago, my daughter Rebecca texted me for good luck. Her text said, "Mom, you will rock." I love this. Getting that text, it was like getting a hug. And so there you have it. I embody the central paradox. I'm a woman who loves getting texts, who's going to tell you that too many of them can be a problem. Actually, that reminder of my daughter brings me to the beginning of my story, 1996, when I gave my first TED Talk. Rebecca was 5 years old and she was sitting right there in the front row. I had just written a book that celebrated our life on the internet, and I was about to be on the cover of Wired magazine. In those heady days, we were experimenting with chat rooms and online virtual communities. We were exploring different aspects of ourselves, and then we unplugged. I was excited. And as a psychologist, what excited me most was the idea that we would use what we learned in the virtual world about ourselves, about our identity, to live better lives in the real world. Now, fast forward to 2012, I'm back here on the TED stage again. My daughter's 20, she's a college student. She sleeps with her cell phone. So do I. And I've just written a new book, but this time it's not one that will get me on the cover of Wired magazine. So what happened? I'm still excited by technology, but I believe, and I'm here to make the case, that we're letting it take us places that we don't want to go. Over the past 15 years, I've studied technologies of mobile communication, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, young and old, about their plugged-in lives. And what I've found is that our little devices, those little devices in our pockets, are so psychologically powerful that they don't only change what we do, they change who we are. Some of the things we do now with our devices are things that only a few years ago we would have found odd or disturbing, but they've quickly come to seem familiar, just how we do things. So just to take some quick examples, people text or do email during corporate board meetings. They text and shop and go on Facebook during classes, during presentations, actually during all meetings. People talk to me about the important new skill of making eye contact while you're texting. People explain to me that it's hard, but that it can be done. Parents text and do email at breakfast and at dinner, while their children complain about not having their parents' full attention, but then these same children deny each other their full attention. This is a recent shot of my daughter and her friends being together while not being together. And we even text at funerals. I study this. We remove ourselves from our grief or from our reverie, and we go into our phones. Why does this matter? It matters to me because I think we're setting ourselves up for trouble. Trouble certainly in how we relate to each other, but also trouble in how we relate to ourselves and our capacity for self-reflection. We're getting used to a new way of being alone together. People want to be with each other, but also elsewhere, connected to all the different places they want to be. People want to customize their lives. They want to go in and out of all the places they are, because the thing that matters most to them is control over where they put their attention. So you want to go to that board meeting, but you only want to pay attention to the bits that interest you.
All right. So this was about a decade ago, right? And a lot has changed, a lot happened in regards to how we utilize technology in our daily lives. Turkle, of course, coming from a somewhat more pessimistic perspective about the role of technology, but you might feel differently or find yourself a little bit in between. And what I'd like you to do is to take some time on your own to write or type as part of your attendance for today about what you think about the role of technology in our communication. Do you feel like technology is a good and improves upon the way we communicate? Is it mixed? Is it something that has impacted our communication negatively? So take some time to share your own perspective here. And then take some time to reflect on the ways that you use technology to communicate. For instance, the ways that you might use social media, texting, email, and so on. So we'll give you some time to work through that. When you have finished some of your thoughts here, what I would like you to do is to form a group between 3 to 6 people. So you might find some people sitting near you to discuss some of your thoughts and reflection on technology here, including whether or not you find yourself agreeing or disagreeing with Turtle's perspective on the use of technology. Continue to work through this if you're still working, and then once you do, take some time to chat in your groups about this. Oh yeah, I got you.
So.
I don't know, like I wouldn't have some definition without.
Why do you think?
Really know them.
I would agree.
I think that makes things much more small, but, a lot of people do have a lot of. Maybe we're only yeah.
Take a couple more minutes here. I'm going to ask each group to share some of their thoughts. Go ahead and wrap up your discussion here. All right. So what I'd like to do is to have each group share some of the things that they talked about in regards to technology and communication, kind of your perspective after seeing this clip and talking a little bit about it. Saw some kind of lively discussion and perspectives here on technology that I think we can talk a little bit more about together. So why don't we start with this group up here in this corner? What were some things that came up for you all?
We all said it was kind of good and bad.
Mhm.
Having to do with communication skills lacking in the face-to-face aspect.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, like instant connection to people is a good and a bad thing.
Mhm.
That we can call it harm and pleasure, I guess. That's a weird word, but yeah, that's probably that.
Yeah. So there's definitely challenges in terms of the face-to-face interactions and nonverbal elements of communication, right? But the ability to instantly connect with other people, it can be great to send a text, to update somebody very instantaneously, but also it can create this kind of pressure in being on all the time or being asked to be on all the time, right? Whenever I go on a hike and I lose reception for a few hours, I'm always anxious about what messages I've missed, right? Oftentimes we find ourselves, or if you dealt with the power outage yesterday, right? You might have dealt with some of those challenges of technology as well. Good points here. How about this group in the back corner?
So we all have the
Mhm.
like good aspects of good. People can kind of like isolate themselves and rely solely on technology.
Right. So the ability to, as you're saying, keep active communication, keep in touch with people across long distances can definitely be a huge benefit. But at the same time, if the only networks and connections we have with other people are online, that can definitely raise some issues for our well-being, especially when studies have shown that the face-to-face and three-dimensional interaction with other people, including the role of haptics in that process, is something that we as humans really want. Think about the last 2.5 years of COVID, right? We can think about how the limited ability to interact face-to-face, as a lot of us moved classes online and didn't have the same engagement with other people, have helped us to understand some of the isolating elements of technology and the limits that it has on our communication, even as that provides those benefits for engagement too. How about here on this side in the front?
We covered a lot of the same topics,
Mhm.
mostly focused on the connections of long distance.
Mhm.
I can't think of anything that we said that was new to contribute.
I think you all also mentioned a point that I think Turple was a little bit exaggerated in some of the discussion about technology and technology's role, right? If we were to look at this a decade later, I don't know how much her perspective would really change, although I do think that she probably would concede some of the necessity of technology for relationships and communication when face-to-face is not necessarily possible. And then how about here in the back corner?
One thing that I think they mentioned is that they kind of take it for advantage.
Mhm.
We can't communicate, you know, text, but like, you know, it's-
Mhm. Right? Oftentimes we're presented with so many choices, so many ways we can use technology that it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? We have, especially if we navigate and juggle multiple pieces of social media, just having to negotiate all the handles and notifications and updates that we get, right? I'm the type of person where if my inbox has any number next to it and is not like clean with nothing unread, I just get anxious and do not enjoy that. So oftentimes our connection for technology, some of the drawbacks of being constantly connected can play a big role. Yeah.
We also said like keeping up like a facade,
Yeah.
like a false perception.
Right. And that's a point we'll get into a little bit more on Wednesday too. The role of things like catfishing, the way that we have either a totally anonymous or pseudonym type of identity that is a little bit exaggerated or different than how we are face-to-face, but is how we present online, can definitely bring about challenges too, right? I think going into this discussion, it's not that technology is inherently a good or a bad thing, or that it's made our communication better or worse. It's that it's a mix, right? And it's a constant discussion about the roles that technology has had and the changes that technology has brought to the way that we think about communication and the way that we do interpersonal communication. So I appreciated your insights and discussion here, right? One thing that makes me feel really old is to imagine that there are babies, right, who are holding iPads. And I grew up in an age where you had dial-up and you had those really obnoxious sounds as you were trying to get connected to a really slow internet. So it's interesting to see some of those generational changes that impact technology being ubiquitous, available, easy for us to just access. So there's a lot of reasons for us to care about mediated communication. And one of the biggest ones is when we think about ourselves professionally in terms of employment, careers, and all of those things, right? It's got some big impacts. And you don't need to know this or write this down, but I think it's a useful way for us to think about how we use technology in that over 70% of employers will check you online, right? They'll do a Google search or they'll check your social media activity and try to learn a little bit more about you. Oftentimes, right, if they're searching for you and your cover photo is like you drinking beer with your friends, right? That's probably not going to be seen as professional or as somebody who's necessarily a good candidate. As we know, things never leave the internet. And so the process of having to curate or develop or maintain a persona online, at least in terms of how the public sees us, is a really important consideration to how we communicate. In fact, studies also say that if we don't have any sort of presence online at all, that also raises a red flag because it says, who is this person? So oftentimes we have to negotiate our presentation online, even if it's just something like a LinkedIn profile, in order to make sure that we are coming across in a way that's professional or understood to be a good candidate for whoever's hired us, right? So some reports here about cases in which people were not hired on the basis of social media activity and things employers have looked for, including inappropriate videos, photos, other things like that, information such as their previous experience, background, and so on. All that to say, we're incredibly connected. Internet's ubiquitous. Whether we like it or not, that's a part of how we're trying to present ourselves and engage with other people. And it's something we have to think about as we're constantly managing our presence and our profile online. So this is important for how we think about mediated communication. Some of the concerns that Turco brought up that also connect to and impact some of the ways that we have communication online include the idea that inevitably, depending on the type of mediated communication we use, there are going to be things that are filtered out. Even if you send somebody a text, as hard as you try, you are not going to be able to convey nonverbal communication in the same way. You don't have things such as tone of voice or inflection, unless you're sending something like a voice clip in your message. You might do things such as send a message with an effect, use emojis and so on, right? But you're making up for missing elements of nonverbal communication through mediated technology, even more so if you're doing something like an email. Different media will filter out or transmit cues very differently, right? Some people mentioned using Snapchat, which you get this immediate, very visual response, right? You can show somebody, hey, I'm over at Panda Express, right? You've got Snapchat to do that. So you have the visual element versus something like a text or email, where there's a lot more emphasis on the verbal written component of that message. So we also have to think about the ways in which we communicate differently on the basis of using media to communicate. One really good example of this is to say the message, I'm so sorry for your loss, if a friend lost a loved one, right? You could say that face-to-face to them. That's going to be very different than sending somebody a text and sending that with an emoji, right? Versus calling them on the phone and saying that, versus sending that through Snapchat or like messaging them on Instagram, right? Based on how you're using technology to communicate with that person, they're going to understand and receive the message in very different ways. If somebody sends like a frowny face and it's like, I'm so sorry for your loss, that could be read as tacky or disrespectful, as opposed to calling or using another way of communicating with that person. So we have to think about how the technology itself really foundationally changes how we do communicate. So mediated communication, right, is our use of media to convey ideas. One thing that's good to know is media is plural. So rather than saying the media, we might say media shape reality. So media play major roles in how we choose to communicate. One way of thinking about this is to think about something like a conflict, right? So if you and somebody else are in a verbal disagreement, you might have a third person or mediator who's monitoring the conflict and filtering out and regulating your communication if things get too heated. In the same way, right, our communication is mediated through Twitter or through Snapchat or through Facebook. We use media as a way of conveying information. And again, thinking back to the communication model, right, how we move information back and forth. If you're anything like me in the past couple of years, you are absolutely sick and tired of hearing the words synchronous and asynchronous. But synchronous refers to communication that is concurrent. It's happening live. So something like a phone call or something like a Zoom meeting with that person where you're both communicating back and forth in real time is synchronous. And asynchronous is something that is not concurrent. So for a lot of you who are taking online classes, right, you might submit something to Canvas, and then a few days later, you get some feedback on that assignment, right? That'd be an example of asynchronous communication through media. Again, a lot of jokes about how we use Zoom in the past, and in a lot of contexts still use Zoom, right? So with this in mind, could texting be considered synchronous communication? How many folks say yes? Yeah, how many folks say no or unsure? Yeah, so texting can be, depending upon the situation, right? So texting would be considered synchronous communication if you and that person were actively communicating with each other. A really good example is if you're on a bus, right, and you're chatting with that person because it's too loud to directly speak to that person, or there's like a third person there that you don't want to overhear the conversation. You're using, like, you see the little bubbles, you're communicating back and forth actively. It's synchronous because it is happening in real time, even though it's through text. But if there was like a lag or delay, and you don't hear back for a while, that would be considered asynchronous. So synchronicity is about the degree to which both people are going back and forth at the time. So there's a famous communication and media scholar named Marshall McLuhan. And several decades ago, Marshall McLuhan became famous for the phrase, "the medium is the message." And McLuhan's argument is that fundamentally, the way that communication is delivered is shaping the content of that message itself. Again, go back to that example about the way that we use saying, "I'm so sorry for your loss." That's going to be read and understood incredibly differently depending on whether you're saying it over the phone or face-to-face or sending somebody a message, right? Could you imagine how inappropriate it would be to say something like that when you were first messaging somebody on like Tinder or Grindr, right? So how we choose to message and the ways that that message is happening is a really key idea here. In fact, a lot of the popularity of apps such as Vine or TikTok is the fact that they're engaging, like multimodal communication. You get the audio, you get the video in a way that is very different and more engaged than just text. So media play a profound role in defining the communication, but the medium only goes so far, right? The way a message is delivered also works in conjunction with the content of the message itself, right? Regardless of how you're choosing to message somebody, "I'm so sorry for your loss," at the end of the day, you are saying and trying to get that message across, even though it could be read somewhat differently. So I think there's been some pushback against McLuhan a bit in saying that, well, there's more than just the medium in conveying that message, right? There's content for us to consider too. How many folks have been following the Twitter buyout by Elon Musk? A couple of you here and there, right? So if you're not familiar, right, Twitter has been around for quite a while, and Twitter had a process over the last several months in which Elon Musk bought Twitter, right? And now there has been significant discussion over what's going to change for the future of Twitter, right? A lot of people with disagreeing perspectives on particularly how things like content and moderation policies will change, what's considered to be appropriate or available speech on the platform, what's censored or banned on the platform, and so on, right? Take whatever perspective you want on that, but I think the important takeaway is that the ways in which apps and technology impact or regulate or moderate the way we communicate has had a really big and profound impact. The fact that there is so much discussion about the implications of regulations on Twitter, I think, is an important point here, which connects to the idea of netiquette, right? The social rules and norms that we consider to be acceptable when we're using technology. Good example of this is if you're texting somebody, right, and you message them in all caps, then they're probably going to respond and say, why are you yelling at me? Or why are you using all caps, right? So we oftentimes think about what's considered to be polite or appropriate and so on. We might also consider the use of things like norms, right? We use abbreviations like BRB, LOL, and so on to shape our communication online. Norms can also create misinterpretation in communication, right? You might get a text from grandma and say, grandma, stop using the eggplant emoji. It does not mean what you think it means, right? So how we use technology is shaped both by the norms of the platform, its regulations, its policy, the messages it creates, as well as the norms that we've created for ourselves through our interactions with each other. So it's important for us to think about how our communication online is shaped by many of these factors. Technology, including a mediated technology, right? It enables and allows interactions to take place. As a lot of you brought up, the ability to use technology to communicate and connect with friends and to maintain relationships with people that you have not been able to see or otherwise engage with is one major thing that mediated communication brings to the table. It's generative. And I think one of the biggest arguments for technology being a net good for our communication is that it allows interactions that otherwise wouldn't have happened, right? It also facilitates. So for example, in this class, right, there's a Zoom option for folks who aren't able to attend face-to-face. Technology can make it easier for people to engage. If you use things like a screen reader or ASL interpretation to improve accessibility, that is facilitating communication. Technology invites, right? It creates new opportunities for people to engage. You can, within a matter of minutes, create a new profile on a new social media app as a way of engaging in a new way. And there's essentially, right, the bottomless pit of the internet to explore. And it encourages people to interact, right? If you're like me and you use Discord, right, you get on Discord and people see that you're online and likely are more inclined to message you on the basis of seeing that you're there, and you're encouraged to engage. You get notifications, you get updates asking you to engage, right, and respond to a message. Sometimes the first thing you do when you wake up is you check your messages and see who's been in contact with you and who you can be in touch with, right? So we think about platforms like TikTok that have created these possibilities as well, from using videos and connection to enable, facilitate, invite, and encourage. And we can think about how media play powerful roles in dictating what our communication amongst each other might look like. As we'll talk about a bit more on Wednesday, mediated communication also is about managing our impressions. So as a couple people brought up, right, whether or not we're honest online and how we come across to other people plays a really big role in the use of technology, as well as the role of communication apprehension. Studies suggest that people are more inclined to use the internet and online communication if they're more anxious about communicating with other people face-to-face. A lot of games, such as Second Life, other recent titles, things like World of Warcraft, things like Among Us, right? They're popular because they have the ability to voice chat or message or communicate with each other. That's part of the game. That's part of the fun. If you've played any of the Jackbox games, they're kind of similar ideas where we use media to facilitate social engagement with each other. Last thing I want to hit on, and again, we'll get more into some of this stuff on Wednesday, is Erving Goffman, who wrote about a lot of elements of identity and how we present identity, and just the simple idea that we have both a front stage self that we're presenting in our interactions with people, and a backstage self that oftentimes gets into some of the more private details about our lives and personal elements, right? Oftentimes, if you choose to censor or hide what shows up if you are publicly searched on social media versus somebody that you're friends with or have a connection with, that's an example of some of those changes as well. So we manage our impressions and reputation with other people online, and we do so with an eye to the version of ourselves that we want other people to see. So again, I know we got in a little bit late today, so we'll get on some of these ideas in a bit more detail on Wednesday. But to wrap up for today, we talked about mediated communication, the ways that it helps to bring relationships together, but also brings about concerns. and the way that it helps us to shape our identity and sense of well-being. On Wednesday, we're going to be looking at some theories of mediated communication and using them to understand media's role in that entire process. So please pass forward or email your attendance activity for today. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you again on Wednesday.